I'm not sure what you came to hear. Community chaplain seems a funny thing. I call it community ministry. It's kind of just, it's what I do and where I came from. And they asked me to talk about the work that I do with young people. So youth work's come a long way. Basically, I remember my very first youth club that I ever went to way back in the 60s. And it was our minister, Mr. Warren, bless him. He was in the church hall with probably 40 young people for a whole evening on a Friday evening, possibly because the churches expected him to do it. It was one, in those days, you had one minister, one church, and somebody had told me he ought to do youth clubs. So it's where I learned to play cards and dominoes and checkers and do Scottish country dancing. And basically, he was policing it, apart from the bit where he was teaching Scottish country dancing. And I still do remember the steps, and I've been able to use it with my older groups. Well, I'm saying the steps. I learned how to be a caller for the Dash and White Sergeant, the Gay Gordons, and oh, I can't even remember the other one. Never mind. But that's what I learned from my youth club, was that you can go there if you behave yourself. And if you didn't behave yourself, the minister would tell your mum. So basically, it's somewhere that kids are corralled, as it were, and got out of the parents' hair for a little while. So I had my own children quite young, and I think I began to get involved in other things because I had 5 children. And then, so I worked up through going to nursery with them, helping at the schools, I've always interfered in everything. I interfered in PTAs and school trustees and all sorts of stuff. And then they hit teenage years, and they didn't want to go to youth clubs. My children used to sit at home while I used to go and help at youth clubs. But up until sort of probably my mid-30s, most of the youth clubs I helped at was just in an informal way. And I did as I was told, because safeguarding meant nothing to me. I don't even think in the 80s we mentioned that kind of thing. But I guess it must have been there, but I kind of just did as I was told. So my first absolute disaster happened probably in the early 90s. And the community estate where I was living at the time, they decided that there was an awful lot of kids hanging around doing nothing on the estate. And what there was a disused social club just across the road from my house. So a group of old ladies decided that this would be a great thing. And what they would do is open it to the young people, and it would be somewhere for them to go where they would be off the streets, because getting them off the streets was their reason for being. So it was as I say, it was a disused social club. How safe it was, I don't remember. But whoever owned it agreed that we could use it one night a week. And on the first night, well, we had a couple of meetings beforehand, and we had this lovely image that what would happen is that the young people would come in and hang out in the warm, and we would provide drinks and we would talk to them, and everything would be lovely. And it wasn't, because what happened was, on the first night, we opened the doors to 60 young people. 60 people came through the doors, and I've never been more unprepared in my life. They basically just ran riot, and we, as a small group of ladies, could do very little about it. We tried to keep it going. Every time we tried to exclude somebody, they would barricade the doors so we couldn't get out. There was one chap that used to come and play pool, certainly, but we failed to stop him using the fire door as a toilet. It was an absolute disaster for about 6 weeks. And then we just thought, we can't do this anymore. This is getting stupid and we need help. So we called on the youth and community department at the local school. In those days, schools had youth and community tutors and youth and community places. So the guy came out and he talked to us and he just went, I'm not sure how I can help you make this work, because none of you have had any proper training. None of you understand safeguarding. None of you are, have any experience at this kind of youth work. This is very different. You should have perhaps started smaller and built a relationship first and then come in. So I learned so much from that absolute disaster. And I was asked by the guy from the Youth and Community Department if I would like to come and work with them in a voluntary capacity at first, because they wanted to open a youth club on an estate about 2 miles away. And I said yes. And it was probably the best decision I've ever made, because I went on courses and I learned about child protection, which it was at the time. And I learned about all sorts of problems that you can have running a youth club. And we started small, and we started in a little building on the edge of the estate. And because we had the school behind us, obviously we had funding, we could get things like proper pool tables and a canteen and enough youth workers that who knew what they were doing. And this was a big thing, that we had youth workers who knew what they were doing. So I learned an awful lot from just working with those young people. And we did have conversations about many things. I'm not sure I became a chaplain, but I became a kind of almost a father confessor, as it were. They would come to you and tell you what was happening in their lives and anything that they had a problem with. I think the trick was not to allow them to get too close. One of my co-workers foolishly gave one of the young people her home phone number and was bothered with phone calls in the middle of the night from a young lady who was obviously having problems, but didn't really need to share them with a youth worker at 2 o'clock in the morning. So that was probably my best learning experience. And because of that, I think that was when I realized that perhaps God was working in my life, because as part of that, I used to work 1 or 2 days in the local school, high school. And that was when they started to pay me for it, which was very nice, because they said, now that you've been volunteering for a while, would you like to be paid for it? And I went, oh yes, thank you very much. And they said, but you have to come and work in the school for a few days a week, and we're going to have a youth worker in the school, and we've got this hut, and we're going to call it the hut, and you're going to be in there, and you can work with the young people, especially the ones who are struggling to be in classes and that kind of thing. And it was an informal thing, but it worked. But the first day was a bit traumatic, because I walked in and apparently one of the young people had been run over and killed by a bus the night before, which wasn't a good introduction to this job. I didn't know the young person, but the staff room had decided that what I should do is open the hut, and anybody who had come into school the next day who was traumatized by this could come in and talk to me. And I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. But we made them cups of tea, where the members of staff came in, teaching assistants, they came in when they could. Basically, those young people just wanted to talk. But I think God knew what they were doing, because had I not had a face to fall back on, I'm not sure I could have got through those 3 days. There were an awful lot of young people saying, but will she have gone to heaven? She didn't go to church. Will she have gone to heaven? And I said, I'm sure God doesn't mind if she didn't go to church, because, that's not something that God's particularly big on. That's for us. And I'm sure God will be pleased to receive her. So some kids took that, and they were absolutely happy, even with no history of church. Those young people were happy to know that it wasn't going to be the end, or that it wasn't as bad as they thought it was, or it just got them through the next half an hour, because this was their friend that they'd tried to help who hadn't survived, and they didn't know what to do. I did have one young man who refused to come in because he thought I was just after his soul. And I said, your soul is God's problem, Bonnie lad, not mine, but you're welcome to come in for a cup of tea. And he did eventually come in. And actually it was useful for him to talk to people who had experienced the same thing. So I spent a while working for them, and I went on to work for the YMCA, the Homelessness Project, and then I worked with the police. We did it was attached to the police, and it was called the Odysseus Mentoring Project. We mentored young offenders or people who were seen to be at risk of offending. It was all well safeguarded, and we had to go to courses that I learned loads of stuff from. And we were only allowed to mentor them for 1 year, 1 day a week. And I'm rather sad because some of them you remember. There was an amazing guy called Brian who was obsessed with motorbikes. And so I took him up. If anybody knows Newcastle, Westgate Hill is full of motorbike shops. Old motorbikes, new motorbikes, the lot. And he absolutely loved it. So I took him up there with a camera, because this was the olden days and laptops had only just come out. And I took him up there with a camera, and he took some amazing photographs. So we chose the 12 best, and he made a calendar for the following year, which I had printed out on proper paper and everything. And it had his birthday on. His 18th birthday was coming up the following year. And I think what I learned from him was about peer pressure. That young lad he had family problems at home. I'm not saying he didn't, but peer pressure seemed to run his life, because he absolutely believed that because his mates had told him he didn't need insurance to ride a motorbike until he was 19, that was the truth, and nothing I said was going to make any difference. But by the end of that 12 months working with him, we had got him to realize that perhaps his friends weren't speaking with the voice of authority, and that there are other things he has to think about before he does them. Mindfulness wasn't a thing then, and I think we just worked with him in a way that he considered things before he did them. And I'd like to think I made a difference, but I have no idea. I don't know whether he went out and got locked up 6 months later. I have no idea. I just have to hope that in some way I've made a difference. I still do have people come up to me in the street when I go back home to where I did youth work, who are pushing prams or walking with teenagers and going, oh, I loved your youth club. I remember coming to your youth club, which is disconcerting, but very nice that they still remember me in the way that I remember Mr. Warren, who was lovely, and he was a big part of my life. These days, I work in a estate in Billingham. It's not in the estate, it's on the edge of the estate. So the estate's there, church is on the main road, and on the other side of the main road is the Rosebery Primary School. So that's the situation I'm in at the moment. Lockdown has affected what I do a little bit, in that we couldn't have the young people in as much as we would have liked to. The uniformed organisations ran online for as much as we could, but we didn't get the attendance. Now that we've reopened, we have about 40 young ladies on a Wednesday. We have 20 young men on a Tuesday, uniformed organisations. And while I help with those, that's not necessarily my bag, but it is a useful place to gather volunteers for other things. So we do run, the church runs summer schools that we don't put a lot of God in, because they're kind of for everybody, but we do sneak the odd God song in. But we don't do like the scripture union stuff or anything like that. We just do activity days mostly. We had a scientist from STEM come to the last one, and he set fire to his hands, and that was amazing. And kids love science, especially when it's setting fire to your hand and growing things in test tubes, and they love that. So it's more accessible, because I feel that's the best way to serve our community. But what it also means is those young people see the church as a safe space that they can come to. And because we have the capacity for that through our links with the uniformed organizations. We have the volunteers that we can run things for the younger children. But for the teenagers, we don't really have the experience, the energy, the links to do that. So during lockdown, we were contacted by a group that works further through the estate, a group of youth practitioners who were looking for a place to go because the community centre had closed down for the pandemic. And they said, youth work is still allowed. These are a vulnerable group of young people and we want to work with them. Can we use your church? And we said yes, because it just seemed obvious to me that that would be a thing to do, because I'm new, like I say, I'm new in this job. I have only been here a couple of years, and every link is a good link. Every contact that you make is a good contact, whatever it is. So we had a conversation and they ran it. We got some funding through FIC, which is the Faith in Communities Network up here. I don't know if you have anything similar where you are. The Faith in Communities Network worked with us, and we got some funding to pay the youth for the youth work, and we got a little bit of rent as well for the church. But they were quite happy for me to go along as well. They did introduce me as the vicar at the beginning, and I said, I'm not a vicar. I'm not even Church of England. Can I just explain to you what I am? But actually, still in their heads, I think I'm the vicar, because that's what people understand about church. And non-conformism doesn't enter into their vocabulary. So that's fine. Whatever they think I am, I don't mind. I was just happy that I was able to be involved, and they encouraged my being there and helping them out. And because somebody had to open up anyway, so I might as well be there and help. They did mindfulness. They made mindfulness journals. They did yoga with them. They did all sorts of stuff. And those kids were struggling with this pandemic. They really were. They were a group of slightly younger teenage people who were being bear-led, I would have called it in the old days. They were being bear-led by the older ones. And they were seriously at risk of getting into trouble. Wherever there was trouble, that's where they were. So it was only 8 weeks. And some part of me says that wasn't really long enough. But it was something. And it was better than what was happening before. And the thing I remember about better than what was happening before is that's probably the best you can hope for. I worked with a guy called Steve Dixon in the Biker Wall. If anybody's heard, have you heard of the Biker Wall? No, never watched Biker Grove when you were young. It's all right. That wasn't filmed in Biker anyway, but they called it Biker Grove. The Biker Wall's a thing, a fantastic. I think it's a protected site now. It was designed to replace the old roads that went down to the river, and it was built with community in mind. And because there was already a church there and had been for quite a long time, St. Michael's, they built around it, which was great. So you've got this estate. So when I went there, must be about 15 years ago now, the church had fallen into disrepair. So they had a leaky roof, and they had a congregation of about 6 who went and sat in a freezing cold, unheated church with a leaky roof. And they decided enough was enough. So the church army guy spoke to the people who owned the shop fronts in Raby Cross, which is just down the hill from the church. But it was in a parade of shops, and it was right in amongst the houses. And I believe that church flourished there, to be honest. They held their services there on a Sunday morning. And it was a big shop front, so everybody could see. People in the houses across the road could watch them doing the church service. And people walked past and had a look in the window. Some of them banged on the window, yes, they did. But for the most part, they were just curious. This is a church. They'd never even been inside the big church on the hill. But hey, this was a church. So then they decided what they should do, because they realized that during the week, when the schools open in Byker, what happens is all the kids mill around where the shops are. And sometimes that becomes a little unsafe. So Steve opened the doors. We've got a couple of old computers, and I'm talking really old computers, and some internet, and a pool table that was probably the worst pool table I've ever seen in my life. It was one of those that goes on top of a table. It didn't even have 6 pockets. So when they actually hit a ball into the pocket, it would go along the room. And we had a couple of old ladies from the church, and there was me and Steve, and we'd open the doors twice a week, just at the end of school, so that they could, because a lot of the young people who were milling around the shops, their parents were at work. They weren't in, so there wasn't anywhere for them to go. They might have a key to get in the house, or they might have to go and see a neighbor. So what they did was they came in to us instead. And they came in and they went out. And I said to Steve, you know, this isn't quite the youth club I'm used to. When I'm done youth club before, they come in, they spend a couple of hours in there, and then they go home. The parents drop them off sometimes, and then they come and pick them up. This in and out thing was unnerving for me. And Steve went, you know what? It's safer than what was happening before. And he said, we can't stop them from coming and going. We can't make them stay in. This is just a shop front. He says, they come in and they're here because they want to be here. And for as long as they want to be here, they will behave themselves. And you know what? He was right. And that kind of opened my mind to the way I did things. And I think in those days I was a bit more, I did like my structure a bit much. And working with Steve for those 2 years really kind of opened up my outlook to there could be different ways of doing things. There really could. Byker was absolutely amazing. Special interest groups. I don't know whether any of you have had experience of these, but if ever I'm sent to a church and there's no obvious thing happening, when there's nothing at all happening, sometimes what I look for is somebody with a special interest. Say go-karts or motorbikes or gardening. Gardening's huge at the minute. So sometimes the gardening groups are good if you're lucky enough to have a church garden. I remember when I worked for the local authority, the headmaster of that school was mad on go-karts, and he ran a go-kart club and actually engaged with a lot of the young people who would engage with nothing else. And the young men who would sit at the back of English literature and go, nah, this is not for me, would come along to his go-karting club and actually really enjoy themselves because he had a passion and he passed on that passion. And if you've got anybody in any of your churches with a passion, that's what you absolutely do. And yeah, Edinburgh. I have a friend in Edinburgh who for 10 years ran a similar kind of thing, only with motorbikes, but people were referred to her. And I met her through the mentoring project with the young offenders. And in Edinburgh, she had a garage. They had provided a garage, and they used to send these people to her, and she'd teach them how to take motorbikes apart and put them back together again. And that's what they did. And she had a lot of success in the area working with these young people. But eventually, you know, the local authorities pulled all the money out of work like that, and the landlord stopped accepting a very low rent. So that had to close. But for 10 years, she made a huge difference to the young people in Edinburgh, because it was her passion, and it was because it was something that she loved doing, and because it was useful to other people. So I think what else I need to talk to you about. Oh yeah, we did speak before about I do what I do now because it's what we have the capacity for. And we have all people who are already CRB checked and who already understand safeguarding, the access with their group, youth leaders, uniform group leaders, their teachers. They are people So it's cheaper for the church. That's a really bad thing to say, but it's really cheap for the church if they can access the courses elsewhere. So if you can get a safeguarding course through Brownies or the school or some other volunteering that you're doing, that is really helpful for a church, because yeah, your church has got to have that safeguarding policy, but you've got to make it accessible to the people who are going to come and volunteer. And some churches don't have that at all. But through different, and actually in my last in the last workshop I did, there was a girl gave me a really excellent link, if you would like it, to the was it Coventry Diocese? Yes, they've got their safeguarding people together with their comms people, and they've made this website that I shall put in the chat. Hang on. Sorry, the tongue helps. It does help when I'm concentrating. So this is the case. There you go. Now, how do I send that? No, it's not going to go. When I figure out which button to press, you'll get that. Do I just press enter? Oh yeah, I do. Sorry, that's a safeguard. That's a safeguarding dashboard that they've come up with. Now, I hadn't heard of this, because what I normally do is we've got the safeguarding policy, we know what we're supposed to do, but the volunteers who come don't want to read through all that umpteen pages of whatever. So I just do a simplified thing, or I talk them through the things that they need to do, the things that they need to know. We need to walk them through CRB checks. They won't cost them any money because they're volunteers. We need to talk them through all that kind of thing. But this appears to be a really clever thing that Coventry Diocese have come up with. And yeah, I'm really chuffed with it. So I said that I would share it with my next workshop. So there you go. There's something that I didn't know before today. Oh, sorry, I'm right. We've only got 15 minutes left, and I should have stopped talking by now. But I normally leave the last little bit for questions and conversation about what you're doing, what you need to know. Is there anything that you want to say in the group? So yeah, we've got 15 minutes, so that's fine.
I wanted to ask about volunteers. Obviously, children's work isn't everybody's cup of tea. How difficult have you found it to get volunteers, and what methods have you used to encourage other members of the congregation to get involved in youth work?
I find that other members of the congregation will probably only get involved on a small basis. Sometimes that brings them in a bit more. I have to say, we do have a lady who said, I'll come along if you're going to cook something, because I like cooking. And she does, and she makes amazing cakes. And she came along and she did a couple of sessions with the young people, because, you know, they like baking. Kids love to get messy and they love to lick spoons and stuff. So she came along to do a couple of sessions. And now that we've come out of lockdown, she's like, oh, I could maybe get involved in some other stuff. So yeah, she did. And she's enjoyed it. She came along. I think what really got her was the science day that we had. We had a little bit of funding. So we got a STEM scientist to come to our Busy Bees summer school, because the kids love to watch people setting fire to their hands. And so, yeah. So that was, and she went, oh, do you know, this might be really good. So the other volunteers that I have to admit, I've stolen them from Brownies, from Scouts, from but I do a thing when I go to a new church, if there's no obvious link with young people, I go and offer my time to the school, not to do assemblies or anything, but to go in and just I listen to them read, or I'm an extra body for school trips, or I'm there for anything else that they want to do. So I become a trusted partner, really, and somebody they can rely on if they need somebody to come in. I put my name down on the list when the pandemic first started. The local school had 64 vulnerable young people they were expecting to come in on that first Monday. And I said, look, I'm not vulnerable. I live on my own. I'm not shielding. I'm not doing anything because the church is closed if you need me. So I did go along. And the worrying thing was that on that first morning, they expected 64 young people and they got 16. So yeah, I don't know what happened after that, but they said, well, there's 16 teachers here. So we don't really need it. And I went, no, that's absolutely fine. But you know where I am. I just have to hope, because I haven't been back, that they found out what happened to the rest of those 64 young people. I don't know. But yes, I do. I find if I'm talking to people in the school, some of the classroom assistants are also brownie mums. And yeah, and it's links, and estates do have links like that, because people see the same faces all the time, and because all the kids go to the same schools, and you get that crossover, and they come to brownies. So that's kind of where we get our volunteers from. Yeah.
Take it helps that you're not overtly religious in terms of encouraging the volunteers to come along.
Oh, it really does. And yes, and there are those who have said, why don't you do Bible themed summer schools? Well, because not everybody's in that place. Yes, the kids that come to Messy Church are in that place, but Messy Church is something totally different. The kids who come along to Busy Bees, it's an activities group, and it's something that everybody can feel welcome at. And I do think that, because I go into the school and they say, do you do assemblies? And I go, no, not if I can help it. And, you know, yeah, I can if I have to, but I don't want to become known as the person who does assemblies or the God person, because I can be more useful. There was one of the curates in Fenham. She used to go in and do assemblies, and she said, I wish I could do what you do. I wish I could just go in and read with the kids and get to know them. And I went, well, but you can. And she said, no, I've been told I just have to do assembly. So, and it's awful to be stuck in that rut where you feel you can't. And that's why I'm quite glad I don't have, because church-related community workers are commissioned rather like Church Army rather than ordained. I don't have to wear a collar. I don't have to do a thing like that. There's no barrier. That barrier is not there. I can build more relationships on a different footing, I think. And I think it helps with volunteers and with just having people come along as well.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, we have teaching assistants from the local schools helping as volunteers at our youth club, and it really has, it's really helped with buy-in because they're often the people that know everyone, they know everyone in the school, and they also know all the parents, and so yeah, it's been really good for building connections with people as well.
Because the teaching assistants are much more approachable as far as the parents are concerned than the teachers are, because the teachers are kind of in the same level as the vicars, aren't they? They kind of, we'll not just but we'll have a quick word with the teaching assistant and we'll tell them what the problem is. So yes, teaching assistants are great for making links. As are dinner nannies. I don't think they call them that anymore. When I was at school, we used to have dinner nannies. Did you have dinner nannies?
Dinner ladies.
Yes. They were great. They just used to walk around the yard and pull people inside when it was raining. It's raining again. And they're amazing people to have as youth workers, because they absolutely know how kids work in a very informal setting. So they don't get quite so upset, though they do get really upset if you hide your glasses behind the brick in the wall. But that's another story.
Anne, you mentioned early on about important that young people see the church as a safe space they can come to.
Yeah.
What are the things that might prevent that, or the things that have to be overcome or done to offer that safe space?
Well, firstly, we have to know it's a safe space. So you do have to have your safeguarding, you have to have your CRB checks, so we know it's a safe space. Young people will only know it's a safe space with experience, by talking. and you have to be very considered how you make relationships with young people. They have to, it takes a long time to build trust, and it doesn't take very much to break it. So that young man who refused to come into the hut because I was only after his soul, it did take a little while to build up a relationship where, and after that, actually, in the years that followed, he did become a regular right up until he left school. He would be there every lunchtime, but it did take quite a while for me to build up his trust. And it's about providing things that they're interested in as well, and trying to be that presence that isn't intrusive, but is there for them, if you know what I mean. If you talk about other things, they get used to you as a person. I've become known as that wifey from the church, and people will come up to me in the street and go, you're that wifey from the church. I did have one guy throw stones at me, but that's only one. That's fine. But yes, it just takes time. But like I say, you need to know that what you've got is a safe space, and that it's not sort of threatening to them. Yeah, that they're not going to be judged, they're not going to be criticized, they're not going to be smacked around the head with a Bible. They're just going to be welcomed.
Thank you.
Excuse me, I think I put my glass of water somewhere. Behind the screen. I went through your screen to get me water then. Did you see that? Yes. Have I mentioned about, yes, I have. No, it's, oh, have I told you about playing Newcastle? Oh, I haven't really got time. No, playing Newcastle was another thing that I did in partnership, and I was going to mention it because it's another way that you can do youth work, because in Newcastle they paid off all the youth workers. Local authorities, when they took all the money out, they paid off all their youth workers, and I'm sure there'll be something similar in other places in the country, because the youth workers all got together and they made a community interest company, and what they do is they work in partnership with venues. So our church was a venue. My church in Fenham was a venue. They applied for the funding on our behalf, and they were excellent, because we had absolutely no capacity to do youth work at all in Fenham. And to make it possible to provide a space and to be there for that group to work and really provide good quality youth work that was appropriate to the situation you're in is really what churches need to start thinking about doing, and not trying to do it with a few old people who are a bit keen but don't really know, because it's very easy to get overwhelmed and tired. And playing Newcastle were great, and I know they work with other venues, but they had no objection to me going in and being there as well. The same as Corner House, they had no objection to any input from the church, and it worked really well. And it just takes the pressure off the people in church who are being pressured to run youth clubs. If it's not your bag, it's not your bag. And I do see a lot of churches stressed out because they think, oh, we should be doing youth work. Do you know what? Get somebody else to do it. Give them a space and give them the tools to do that thing and do it well, rather than not do it very well at all. Yeah. And access free courses if it's at all possible. Yes, I think that's probably it. As far as advice goes, I think I've all run out. But if you've got any questions, please, yeah, feel free. I might have been there before. We've got 3.5 minutes.
You talked about the town centre church in Baker and the work that you did there. Did that continue? Has it become a long-term project?
I believe it did. When I left, it was still happening. Although, I mean, it was sort of a long time. It was 15 years ago. I don't know what they did after they got, but I realized recently that the church has been mended and they've started using the church up the hill again. But it has joined together with the community centre, which is just sort of adjacent to it. So I'm thinking that whatever was happening on Raby Cross sadly will not be happening anymore, which is a huge shame, and I wish it was. But there will be youth stuff happening further up the hill with the community centre and the church. So I'm hoping that something, but Steve Dixon was probably moved on years ago. I really had to respect that guy, because not only did he work in the biker wall, but he believed in it so much that he had his family live there. And that's dedication.
So what, with the format that it used, obviously they had the computers, did they do food and drink?
Yeah, refreshment. Oh, food's always a great thing for getting.
Was it
kids.
free or was there cost involved?
Oh no, it was free. It was, they never charged. It was free. I mean, when I say refreshments, I mean juice and toast.
Yeah, exactly, the classics.
Yeah. If you've got a toaster, they'll just walk through the door. They smell the toast. I could have stood there for days on end making toast, and they would have just come in for toast. So it's not expensive stuff. It's just, yeah. Somebody asked in the last thing about if you haven't got a place, and I was telling them about some of the outreach I'd done. But it is a shame you've got nowhere to make toast. We used to do outreach on the streets, and we'd often get a bus and take the kids fishing or something like that. So that was another couple of interesting projects. You work with what you've got, whatever it is that you've got there. That's what you have to work with. You can wish all you like, but you'll not get the best building or the best staff or anything. You do your best with what you've got.